Hi, I'm Lindsay from Shreve Memorial Library and welcome to Art Club. This week we're going to do something a little bit different, definitely different than what we've been doing lately. You see we have the watercolors back out, well, and gouache, but the watercolors are back out and we have this super fun toothbrush. We are going to make a watercolor galaxy. Now, one big difference here is there's no traceable for this. This is just you do it how you want to do it. We're going to paint some trees in there, but you do those how you want to do those too. This will be super duper simple. It'll be fun. You see, I guess to the bottom, let's see, over here, you'll see the finished product for what we do right now. But yeah, there's no traceable. You don't need one. Just follow along. You don't need to use exactly what I'm using. I will suggest watercolors for this. But other than that, whatever you want to do. So here are the supplies you need. Notice we don't need a pencil or an eraser this time. That's also a first. I have watercolors. Now it's kind of hard to tell because they're all so dark. This is a dark blue. Okay, so the colors that you basically need, you can totally do this in one of those things with the ovals. Those are perfectly fine. I have a very dark blue. If you don't have a really dark blue, just mix some black into your blue and that'll be perfectly fine. I have a really dark blue. I have a light blue. This is like a turquoise color. If you don't have turquoise, just get some green and mix it in with your blue. There you go. It's perfectly fine. I have a purple and I have a pink. So for color combinations, you don't need to use these. The reason I chose these is that they mix together well and they won't turn brown. So if I introduced yellow into this and some of my yellow got into my purple, it wouldn't go very well and I just end up with muddy brown. So, and same thing goes for orange, and that's why I don't have those colors. That's why I chose this color palette, was just to make it easier. Easier not to end up with some mud colors. Anyway, so you need whatever combination you want to use. You probably want blue for the sky and some other colors in there. So I also have gouache. I have white gouache and I have black gouache. You do not need to use gouache for this. Instead of the black gouache, you can totally use watercolor. You can use ink. It'd be a great time to use markers, pens. That would be perfectly fine. So whatever black you want to use. Black watercolor is great. For the white, you want something opaque. I have this acrylic gouache here. You don't need to use that. You can use white watercolor. It won't be as opaque as you want, probably. This really might not either, but it'll be fine. White acrylic paint that's watered down some, like regular acrylic, works wonders. That'll work just fine. Whatever, this is for stars. So don't stress out about that. Just use anything that's white and opaque will work just fine. So I also have some brushes. I have a big brush and I have a slightly less big brush and I have a toothbrush. Don't use the same one you brush your teeth with. You get that. Just use some old toothbrush. It would be fine. I have found that some toothbrushes do better than others. This is a I think I got this from the dentist and this one works really well, so I've kept it for painting purposes for a long time. Anyway, yeah, and that's pretty much it. You'll want some sort of palette. I just have this little guy right here, and you'll want some water, and this is watercolor paper down here, and that's really all you need. So you just pretty much, you need mostly transparent paints, watercolors. You need one opaque paint, white, acrylic, and brushes. And that's been paper. And that's pretty much all you need. Let's get going. Okay, the technique I'm going to use today is called wet and wet. Oh, I forgot about that. Disregard this. I'll have black over it. This watercolor paper was on what's called a block, which is kind of like a memo pad that's sealed around the edges on every side. And I got it off the block with a palette knife that I had used for oil paint. Because of course I did, and that's a little bit of oil paint, but that'll get covered up and that's perfectly fine. Anyway, so for wet and wet, here's what we're going to do. We're going to, and you might want to watch this video through once before you paint it, just because or else you might just want to watch it and then, yeah, and then just go do your own thing, just because you kind of have to do it fast before it dries. At least the beginning of it, like the galaxy part, you really need to do that before we get to the white part. So here's what I'm going to do. I have a pretty big brush. I'm going to wet it really well, okay? So I want this wet. And now I'm going to go wet my whole paper. And what you want here, and you might need to do 2 coats of the water, what you want here is you don't want it to pool, okay? But you want the surface of your paper to be wet, and you need it wet enough that it'll stay wet for a few minutes, okay? But you don't want little pools of water, or else you'll be unhappy with that too. So I'm going to do 2 little coats of water. Now, different kinds of watercolor paper that you use will give you different results. Like the I'm not currently using that weirdo texture watercolor paper that I usually use. I'm using a different kind. And there's this little hair up in there. There we go. For this one, because I don't think I would be happy with the result, the main thing is you need to be, for this, you need to be using a heavy watercolor paper. And that's number 1, okay? Just make sure, preferably 300 GSM. If that's not what you have, that's fine, but you're going to get a lot of buckling if you don't use heavy watercolor paper. Okay, so this is wet. Here's what we're going to do. I should have, well, I guess they are. Okay, so I'm going to use my other brush, okay? And I'm going to start with my light colors. And kind of have to do this fast. So I'm going to do this. Ooh, that is not the right color. That's a very green color. That's not what I was going for. I'm going to mix some blue into it and solve that problem. Okay. Let me grab some paper to test it. Not that paper. Oof. Better. Okay, we need a lot of water. So here's what you're gonna do, since I just did that. Nothing. Like, you really want your paper to be wet. Okay, not pooled though. So I want this to be light. I'm gonna start. You can leave like an empty spot in the middle if you want. So you want to start like this, and you don't want it to be symmetrical, because nature isn't symmetrical. So I'm gonna start with that. I'll put in some purple. Okay, I want these colors light right here, not that light. So I'm just diluting them with water. But you see, like, and they're kind of already blending together, and that's why you want colors that will go along well with each other and not compete and turn brown. Okay, and so you want your lighter colors in the middle. I'm gonna get some pink. Woo. Dilute it a lot. Put some pink in here. You can spatter it around. Oh, I didn't want that in the middle, so we're just gonna do that number. And remember, watercolor dries lighter than it looks like it's going to. Okay. So just do whatever you want in here. And then, once you're happy with that, and remember it will dry lighter, go get your darker blue. Okay, and this one we are not going to dilute like that. This is my favorite blue for galaxies. It's great to use right out of the tube, but that's not what I'm going to do. This is indigo. And it is a very dark blue. So then you get your darkest blue, or just least diluted blue. You go around the edges like that. Let it go into it some. You don't want it to be a circle in there. You want it to be an interesting shape. So, and the amount of color pigment that you get out of the whatever kind of watercolor you're using will vary depending on what kind of watercolor it is. We don't want it. Now I'm doing this like this and letting it be dark down here just because it'll lighten up and I'll still be able to see the black over it for the trees. But bring some of this in here. Do however you want. Don't stress out about it. You see, this is not a thing to be a perfectionist about, and I am a major perfectionist about most things. But this is not one of those situations where you need to do that. If you want to bring in another color, you can. Like, I think I want to be brave and add a wee bit yellow. So I'm going to get a yellow. Clean off my brush really well. And you can only do this while your paint is still wet. That's the main thing. Your paint has to still be wet when you do this. I'm being very careful where I put it. You see that purple over there? I don't want it in the purple. Okay, and you see how it's spidering? I love how it does that, but a little bit up there. And as you can play with it until your paper starts drying. And then you just have to stop. If you get it too dark in some places, you can take the water off of your brush as well as you can and sop some of it up. And it will be lighter. But what you want is you want it to be nice and light in parts of it and darker in others. One other thing you can do is you can tilt it. Like I see mine is kind of puddling down here. And I'm just going to tilt it like this and let some of that go down to the bottom here. You can tilt it in other directions. And that just gets some of the like spidery bits going. And it'll make it more interesting. Okay? So when you're all done, you can keep on going until your paint is starting to really dry. And then you want to stop because then you'll end up unhappy. So I'm going to just take some of this off just to show there's more of it up here. You can totally do that. This is a night sky. I don't want it to be symmetrical. I want it to look like a night sky. So I went camping or something. I could look up over the trees and be like, oh, this is nice. So I'm just sopping up some of this paint. Also, the amount you'll be able to sop up depends on what kind of paint you're using and what kind of paper you're using. Like if you're using a really stainy color like phthalo blue or something, you won't get much of it off. Okay, so my paper is starting to dry. I'm going to go and sop up a little bit of this just so I know the trees will work. And it's coming all back together, which is good. But it's getting to the point, like I really wet this well, as you saw. It's getting to the point that it's drying. Other thing you might want to do is go back and do more dark in the corners like this. I wouldn't do the bottom corner just because we're going to cover that up with trees. But again, don't mess with it once it starts getting dry because then that's when you end up unhappy. So I'm just going to darken these corners. You can keep playing with it. It's just with that caveat. So when you're done, now if you want to dry it like with a blow dryer, which is what I'm going to do, what you need to do, oh, this looks terrible right now, all shiny. What you need to do is let it dry until the paint on it isn't like pooled anywhere and isn't going to move around a lot, because you can totally change your painting for the worse if you blow it dry too early. You can always just let it sit for a little bit and it will straighten itself out. I've dried my painting. You see even this super heavy watercolor paper has buckled some, but it'll go down later. And if it doesn't, when you're done, once it's completely dry, you can like put it under a heavy book or in a heavy book, and it will dry flat. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. You want your painting completely dry for this part, and I am going to, I'll just use this. This is the lid of my big watercolor pan. And let's see, I'm gonna get white paint. Again, it doesn't matter what kind, it just really needs to be opaque, and the more opaque the better. So white acrylic paint is great. This is gouache. This is white acrylic paint essentially. So here's how we're gonna do this. Okay, you're gonna moisten your brush. You might need to clean out your water if it's super duper blue. You're gonna moisten your brush a little bit. Okay, and you're gonna go into your paint like this. Okay, so you're gonna get paint like that. Practice first. You see how it's making those little dots? You see that? That's how I want it. So make sure it's making shapes like you want it. And put it, this is, let's see, there we go. And put stars all over your sky. This is called spattering. And all you're doing is putting little dots. If you aren't comfortable doing this, you can just do little dots. And that's perfectly fine too. You can put as many or as few stars on here as you want. And there's your night sky. Now, you might end up with a comet, which is fine, especially, you know, for if you haven't done this a lot. Comet's just like a big old glop of paint. And at that point, you can choose to give it a little tail, make it really comet. You can make it the moon. You can do whatever you want with it. So don't let, like, especially, you know, if you're coming to this and you've never spattered before and you're like, oh my gosh, then hey, you made a moon. It's cool. It's all good. So do not stress out about this part. That's nothing to stress out about. Just practice on a little scrap first to see what it's going to do, and specifically what that toothbrush is going to do, because believe me, toothbrushes act differently. If you came to a library program where we did this probably a year and a half ago maybe, for art club at the libraries, and I ordered these toothbrushes for it, and it turned out that they were the worst toothbrushes ever. And yeah, I tried one. I was like, oh, we can't use these. And it was just the kind of toothbrush it was. And so I ended up having to go to the dollar store and get toothbrushes and those were perfectly good. Like we still use them. Well, when, you know, we will still use them when we can do programs at libraries again. That will eventually happen. Anyway, so yeah, so here is my painting. Once again, I need to make sure that this is completely dry before I do anything, because I don't want to smear my lovely little stars. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to dry it, just make sure it's completely dry, and then we will paint some trees in. My painting is dry now, and so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use this one. Again, you don't have to use gouache for this. You can use acrylic paint. You can use whatever you want. Don't stress about that. I wasn't thinking markers. Paint markers are great for this. It's perfectly fine. I didn't think to grab the appropriate brush for this though, so I need to find, this will do, a small brush. So here's how I'm going to do this. I'm just going to get black paint. You can even really do it with, like, if you have that dark blue, you can do it with dark blue. That's fine too. I'm going to get some black paint, and I want it thin enough, make sure, yeah. I want it thin enough that you can, that it's not gloppy on my paintbrush. And so I'm going to draw some lines. Just straight down. They're going to get shorter in the middle. They don't need to be perfectly straight. Trees aren't perfectly straight for the most part. Some of them are. Okay, and this is just going to show me where my trees are going to be. You don't want them to be the same distance apart. You don't want them to be the same height. You can put them as close together, as far away from each other as you want. And let's see, shorter one here. You see I'm just kind of staggering the distance between them and the height, because I don't want them to be all the same height. If your lines aren't perfectly straight, do not worry about it. We're going to go back and that will not matter. So we're just, let's see, you can always go and change. You can make your trees taller. Can't really make them shorter, but they can be taller. Okay, I'm going to put one more over on this side, like that. And do one right there. Okay, so these are where my trees are going to be. And what I'm going to do here, I'm going to get more black. I'm just using black for these. I'm going to start. You can make these trees look like anything you like, any trees you want. Mine are kind of be like Christmas trees, I guess, but kind of like, so there's the top. You can see that. And then I'm just kind of scribbling down like that. I want to leave, I don't want them to be completely like opaque trees. Like I want the branches to show, so some of the sky shows through. But you see I'm letting them overlap with other trees. I'm kind of covering up the center, but that's okay. And so, and they get wider as they go to the bottom, and they will all overlap with each other, and toward the bottom I will probably end up with like black across. And you can have the ground down here. I was just kind of thinking, looking up from a lovely campsite. So you see what I'm doing? All I'm doing is I'm kind of just scribbling. You'll be able to see better once it's dry. That's why I like gouache so much, is it dries so opaque. And you don't want it to be completely symmetrical. You want branches to be out everywhere because that's the way branches grow. Don't worry about it if you have branches going out everywhere. That's for the best. So I'm just scribbling down the tree, and yeah, that's really all there is to it. So just this part isn't really time sensitive because everything else is dry. So take your time, make your trees look like you want them to look, and just remember that they're bigger at the bottom than they are at the top, and they're not going to be symmetrical. So don't stress out about them, just paint across. So I've painted my trees across, and now I'm just going to go back and see that they've started to dry. See if there's some areas I do need to fill in. Like you see how you can still see the sky through there. I like that, but some of them just kind of seem like that shouldn't be showing through, or all of that shouldn't. I kind of want to leave that one because it's kind of big and neat. And just fill in as much as you think you need to. And that'll be about it. I think I'm done with that. I did fill in the bottom all the way across, so I'm going to make sure that holds. And really, that's it. Here's what I'm going to do though. Here I have my white. Looks like some of it's still wet. Okay, so since this is black, I need something opaque to go down here. Here's a super secret fun thing about gouache. Now this is acrylic gouache. Thus, issues. You can mix watercolor into it, and it makes opaque watercolor. Isn't that exciting? So I'm going to sign my name with that. This actually needs to be dry first. So I'm going to dry this corner really fast. Another thing I like about gouache is that it dries really fast. I also hate that about gouache. It's complicated. So with this color, I'm going to sign my name. Don't forget to sign your painting. Okay. Now we have one thing left to do, which I think is exciting. And that is to pull this up. If you have yours taped down, pull up your tape slowly and carefully so you don't rip your paper. And this looks so nice. That got super saturated up there. That's okay. And let's see. Ew, wow, that held really well considering how wet that is. Excellent. So here is my little watercolor galaxy night sky. I think it turned out super cute. I hope yours did too. This is one of those that you can do and redo and redo and redo. Try different color combinations. You can do all kind of stuff with this. Yeah, this was super fun. I like how mine turned out. Watercolor galaxies for me are always a good time just because they always turn out so differently. Like I've never painted the same one more than once. Anyway, thank you for joining me this week for Art Club. If you painted along with me, please take a picture and send it into the library's social media. We love to see what you do. And yeah, I will see you next week and we will make more art. Bye.